There was no analysis on the front end. It was just like, podcasts are too limiting. We've got to do something bigger. And I didn't really critically consider all of the ways that this could have gone wrong. And boy, did we feel it over the next couple of years.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the My Biggest Marketing Mistake podcast, the podcast that transforms costly failures into priceless insights. I'm your host, Kacy Maxwell, and I am really excited to unpack this story with you today. Today's story focuses on one of the most important and honestly most often misunderstood aspects of marketing, and that's how to position my company. Now, if you missed our first episode, I sat down with Aaron Witt and we unpacked a failure when he tried and failed to scale a marketing strategy. There's a lot of insights in there and you're going to want to check it out. Now, if you are joining us for the first time, I want to reiterate, this is a podcast about failure. We are going to be talking all about a failure that happened in a CEO's business. Why? Because honestly, failure can be the best teacher if you're willing to dig a little deeper. Adam Grant once said, "The purpose of debriefing bad decisions is not to blame and shame. It's to grow and change. Failure is an invitation to reflection. The most important question is not who's at fault, it's how to improve. Yesterday's mistakes are lessons to learn today and apply tomorrow." So our failure story today focuses on positioning gone wrong. Positioning is honestly the foundation of any successful marketing strategy. It's how you define your place in the market, how you differentiate yourself from your competitors, how you communicate that value to your customers. I mean, without clear positioning, even the best laid marketing plans are going to fall flat. Because if your audience doesn't know what you do or why it matters, nothing else you say or do is going to resonate. And the funny thing is that most companies believe that they have positioning nailed. They say, well, I know what we do and I know who we serve. And that's all we need. If those are the only two things that you know, your messaging is going to be too broad, too generic, or most likely unclear. And the problem is that nobody wants to spend the time to actually do positioning right. Right? They want to just can we just go to the next step of sending emails? Can we just do more? I want to get it out there. Just doing the activity without answering these key fundamental questions, you're going to be blaming the marketing when it's not the marketing's fault. It's the positioning. And so today we're going to dive into that and more with one of my favorite people, James Carbary. So James is the founder of Sweetfish, a video podcast agency. James and his team have pioneered B2B video podcasting. They are helping countless people out there unlock its power. But like many entrepreneurs, James hit a moment where his vision outpaced the market's understanding of it. So this episode is not just about James's failure. It's about the universal challenges of positioning a company, right? It's how do you align your team around a common vision? How do you make sure that your customers really understand what you are and what you do? And how do you pivot when you realize you've made a mistake? So these are questions that every marketer, every CEO, every entrepreneur are going to need to answer so that they don't make the same mistake in their company. So stick around and get these great insights after this.
You want to grow, and you need a marketing partner to help accelerate the process. At Provisions Group, we take a comprehensive approach to marketing and technology to maximize impact and growth. We work alongside you to build and implement a customized marketing plan, and we help you optimize your tech stack so you can operate efficiently and securely. Plus, our tenured fractional advisors are here to partner with you to keep your objectives aligned and create a roadmap to success.
Well, hey, James, I'm really excited to chat with you today. I'm sure you are just sitting over there itching to talk about a failure. Everybody loves talking about times they made mistakes. So first of all, thank you for sharing this. And the question that I'm asking everybody on this podcast before we get into the story is, tell me a little bit about your relationship with failure. Like, why are you okay to come on a podcast and talk about it with a bunch of people?
It's funny. My wife and I, we were doing our morning walk yesterday morning, and she was like, James, one of the blessings and curses of being married to you is how quickly you forgive yourself. And I was like, I don't know whether to be offended by that or to take that as a compliment, but I think to some degree, to be an entrepreneur means you have to be some level of masochistic to, because it's just banging your head up against a wall over and over and over and over again to get to the 1 in 25 ideas that actually work. And so I think it's just reps and sets and having failed so many times that I just have become kind of numb to it. It's like, yes, this is likely going to fail, but if we don't try it, then we're not going to learn anything from it. So I can't get closer to the thing that's not going to fail. So I love talking about this stuff, frankly. Like it doesn't, yeah, I probably have a weird take on failure in that I welcome it because I know that it's a progression toward the stuff that works.
So let's kind of set the scene. Tell the audience a little bit about Sweetfish. Kind of like what was your vision for it? How did it kind of start? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so we started as a blog writing shop and quickly pivoted into becoming a B2B podcast agency. So, blog writing shops are a dime a dozen. It was very hard for us to make any money writing blogs. I didn't know how to do it anyway. The first year that we were around, that was 2015. Toward the end there of 2015, I figured out that I could do a podcast and interview anybody that I wanted to talk to by just saying, hey, I've got this show. Do you want to be a guest on it? And people would say yes. And so that was our foray into kind of becoming, to my knowledge, one of the first like B2B podcast agencies. We kind of created the category, if you will, of B2B podcasting. There weren't, back in 2016, nobody had put B2B and podcasting together yet. And so we are kind of building this category, trying to educate, B2B marketers. What is this medium? How can you leverage it? We're big proponents of content collaborations for business development. So like, hey, bring on your prospects to be a guest on your show, have a great conversation with them. And then on the back end of that, you now are friends with somebody that could potentially become a buyer. People obviously abused that and were doing it just as like a kind of a churn and burn sales tactic. And so I think it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths after, these executives are getting asked to be on shows that are not very good. The hosts are just trying to get a meeting with them. And so we started seeing the writing on the wall there. But more than that, we were talking to these mid-market companies, enterprise companies, and they just didn't really care that much, frankly, about developing relationships with individual buyers. They wanted their content to shape a market. They needed to change the way an entire market thought about the problem that they solved. And content-based networking is what we called this kind of one-to-one content collaboration approach. That was not the answer for them. So they didn't really care about building one-to-one like if they closed 1 or 2 deals a month from guests on their show, it wouldn't move the needle for them. They needed something bigger. Like they needed to build a brand, they needed to influence an entire market. And so I started thinking like, okay, well, how do you do that? Well, the format of the show is impacted by that. The way that you distribute the content is impacted by that. Clips on social, YouTube has to be a part of that mix. A newsletter is part of that mix. And so we're trying to solve for what our clients are ultimately trying to do, which is build thought leadership and brand awareness for their company, not just build individual relationships with guests that could turn into clients. And in the pursuit of that, kind of came up with this language that I see some media companies using, but called media brands. And so a media brand it's not just a podcast. It's this holistic mix of media. The way we defined it, it was a podcast, it was a YouTube channel, it was a social presence. and it was a newsletter. And so the newsletter allows you to collect this first party audience data, and then the YouTube channel allows you to tap into an entirely new audience of billions of monthly active users. And then the podcast is kind of the content flywheel that fuels all of those channels. And we all obviously know the importance of social. And so we put this together, and we were like, okay, we're going to stop selling podcasts, and we're going to start selling media brands. And that's kind of the foray into the problem that ended up being a big problem for us the next probably year and a half as we tried to march forward with that positioning.
So you see this pivot, right? You actually were pivoting to do it the right way and sort of lead the market on this podcasting. When you made that shift, how did you think through changing the positioning of your company the first time? What was the process of going from a blog company to podcast?
Yeah, it was a much simpler process the first time, because it was just me and a bunch of freelancers, and so it was. I think the website for the business was still like a lead pages landing page. Like there was no. It was very. We were very bare bones. I think we had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 clients that we had gotten from cold email up to that point. And so it was a little bit, janky, because I'm having to go to those 10 to 12 clients and like, hey, like, what if we keep doing your blog, but we just make a podcast out of it instead? And like, that's how we'll fuel the content for the show. And so we tried to shoehorn the new service in with the old, but that was a relatively, simple transition, because our team was very small and obviously agile, and we just kind of went with it. And I don't know if I was necessarily expecting that to happen again. Fast forward, we had a team of like 45 people and freelancers on top of that. And it was a much more complex organization. But as an entrepreneur, you just feel this like conviction in your bones that this is the right move, and that the same passion and excitement and like just conviction that this is how it should be done, that's what's required to get you from 0 to 1. And so it's incredible. It's intoxicating to feel that level of like conviction that this is what should be happening right now, and I'm gonna freaking will it to existence. The downside of that is that it puts these blinders on, and I did not go through a process at the beginning to go essentially a SWOT analysis of like, okay, what's the upside of this? What would be the strengths of us doing this? What's the downside if we end up deciding to reposition the business around this concept of media brands? I didn't do any of that. There was no analysis on the front end. It was just like, podcasts are too limiting. We've got to do something bigger. We have to be able to collect first party data for our clients that want to build these audiences. So a newsletter has to be a part of it. We'd be dumb to miss out on the giant that is YouTube right now. And I think I tricked myself into thinking like, oh, we're not pivoting the business. This is just an evolution. It's like we were podcasts, now we're podcasts plus these other things. So I can always justify these things a million different ways from Sunday. And because of the passion and conviction and just how much I believe in it, and because I'm the only owner of the business. So it's kind of like, okay, well, James wants to do this, I guess we got to do it. And I've tried, to not surround myself with yes men and people that will push back. And the CEO of our business now, Jeremy, I'm the founder and he's the CEO, and like there's really good rapport there, and he does push back. But at the end of the day, like it's ultimately my call if I want to push something. And so I didn't do that thinking. I didn't really critically consider all of the ways that this could have gone wrong. And boy, did we feel it over the next couple of years.
It's amazing in my career how much marketing has been done on gut of this is the right marketing decision. Why? I just really feel like it's the right decision, right? Like, and you're like, I've had so many meetings with non-marketing leaders, and we sit there and again, I'm not that type of marketer that is only about the data. Like there are so many things. Gut works a lot of times, feeling, perception, talking to customers and just getting this sense that can override data. But a lot of times the data is so clear, but no matter how clear that data is, if there is a conviction in the ultimate decider, which is a lot of times a CEO, sometimes it's a marketing leader, ultimately a CEO, it just gets overridden. And we make these decisions just because you so felt like it was right. So you make the shift, right? You say, guys, who's coming with me? Let's go. You change it to this media brands. Talk to me about when you started to realize that that was a mistake.
So when we shifted into it, that it's going to take a bit for the market to respond, right? Like all this talk about category creation and the Christopher Lochhead way and languaging. It's like the reason that so many of the examples he shares in his first book were these giant corporations. Were because you need an enormous amount of resources to reshape the way a market thinks about something, and it takes time. And so I knew when we first shifted into it, I was like, okay, the market's receptivity to this. I was like, it's too obvious for the market not to get it. Like they obviously know that content needs to be way more than like a channel by channel strategy, but I'll do the same thing I did before when I was talking about B2B podcasting, and I'll just beat the drum. I'll beat the drum. I'll beat the drum. I'll beat the drum. And eventually, we'll be there to provide the services when the market starts to come. So I was gearing up for it to take a while. So I went in with that mindset of like, from the market's perspective, this is going to take a bit. So we saw that, our sales opportunities were, we weren't closing as many deals, revenue wasn't coming in the door. And it was like, okay, we knew this was coming. But eventually you get to a point where it's like, it's been too long and we don't have the resources as a business. We're not a behemoth organization. And so we can't just sustain this level of like waiting for the market to catch up to what we're doing. And so we were about a year in, and before I realized like this, I just can't, we can't continue to do this.
When something starts going wrong, right? You kind of said, we started to see this dip, right? And we said, we know that's going to happen, right? Anytime you create something new, there's an expectation. So you're watching numbers. Did the first thought that go through your mind when you're seeing those numbers is, we're just not, like, we've got a marketing issue. Like our marketing is just not compelling. They're just not doing a good job. You need to fix the way you're saying it because you're not saying it right. Or was it like, sales, you got to figure out how to sell it better, right? Before you got to the crap, it's the positioning. Like that's the catalyst. Like, because it seems like what I often see is marketing is the first problem of everything. Like you start there. You're doing something wrong in marketing. You're not sending who's writing these emails? When are we sending? How much are we sending? What does the website say? Let's change the website. And again, that's not wrong. It's not wrong to go in and test that. And you need to look at that. And you need to train your sales team to make sure that, listening to calls and ongoing. But how many steps did you go to until you got to the point where you're like, it's positioning. It's bigger than both of those things.
Well, we've never really had a sophisticated marketing function at Sweetfish because we, rode the coattails of being one of the first folks talking about B2B podcasting. So there was and the nature at which we did our own show, I literally interviewed, 700 or 800 VPs of marketing that were our ICP because of the original strategy of the show. And so I knew a lot of people in the space. I was writing content every day on LinkedIn. I was talking about these things. The brand association was there. So we didn't really need this send out but we weren't doing email marketing. We didn't have an event strategy. We weren't doing webinars every month. Like it wasn't like what we were doing from a marketing perspective. There was a lot of attributable ways to measure. Oh, they're falling off in this stage of the funnel. Like I'd never been that sophisticated with building out the marketing function. We had a sales team, and it was basically like me being loud on LinkedIn and us building lots of relationships by being very active on that one channel.
What did you do differently in the most recent repositioning?
Yeah, so we hired somebody that knew what the heck he was doing, is essentially what it came down to. And so we knew, okay, this is a positioning problem. I obviously, I'm 1 for 2 at this point. B2B podcasting, we nailed. Media brands, we swung and a miss. We're gonna hire, a fractional CMO to come in and figure out how do we position this thing. And in his work, kind of the fundamental work, he was like, I'm not loving where you guys have landed with this positioning. So he basically came in and kind of overhauled that. And so that's where we went from media brand to video podcast agency. And so it was still a step forward from what we were doing before in just like B2B podcasting. It was primarily audio. But putting those, video on the, people know what a video podcast is. And so it's one of those things, like, I was like, I think we're onto something, because you're presenting this to us as what you think the positioning should be. And I'm going, well, duh. Like, how the heck I had to pay how much for us to land here? But we weren't doing it. Like, that's not how we had positioned ourselves. But as soon as he said it, I was like, like, this makes perfect sense. It's where the market is now. It's adjustable and expandable to where the market, I think, is going. And so it just all the dots connected, the puzzle pieces clicked in, and I was like, why did we not hire you 2 years ago? And so yeah, that was how it ended up. That's how we ended up landing where we are today.
Since you've repositioned to video podcasting, have you seen those numbers shift back? Have you seen your inbound and close rate and that increase again?
Yeah, so it has started. So I want to say we're 2 or 3 months into the website now, reflecting the new position. We've got our sales decks, our intro decks now reflect the new positioning. And it is wild. Like, the first month I was like, oh man, we closed 5 deals this month. We haven't done this in years. And so we're getting in toward now, as we're recording this, the end of the year. And so we're in this kind of like, we see this traditionally year after year in our business, where it's like, okay, folks are wanting to have conversations, but the budget hasn't quite opened up yet for 2025. So we're in this space where we haven't seen another one of those months since like 2 months ago. It's like, so we were like, oh, we've overcome the mountain. And then the next month it was like, well, we're not there yet. So I'm cautiously optimistic, though, based on, some of the conversations and what our pipeline looks like now, that it's like, okay, this messaging is connecting. The position is understandable. It's clear. I don't know if you're a story brand guy at all, but their emphasis on clarity and just, if you confuse, you lose, is so real. And we can, if you were to talk to our sales guy right now, he would tell you, the market very much understands what we do. One thing that we're very bullish on is the format of a show. And so, we've taken a hard stance on that, and have actually said, like, hey, if you want to do this particular format that a lot of shows do, we're just not going to be the right partner for you for a host of reasons. And we've found that when our sales guy takes that stand and really puts a stake in the ground, and he's like, hey, we just don't believe that is the best way to create this kind of content. And so we were happy to refer you to other partners that can help you. that's been super helpful for us. And that's really been kind of born out of that positioning too. So we found that's helped accelerate a lot of deals that would have just from anecdotal feedback that he's gotten from buyers in the sales process to say, hey, everybody else was just kind of like yes-anding me and telling me what I wanted to hear. And for you guys to actually say like, hey, we wouldn't be a good fit if this is the direction you decide to go, is the reason that I ended up working with you. So as like with anything, right? It's not, it's not just the positioning, it's that, and, that us really having a hard point of view on a pretty critical part of the show development process, that intentionally pushes some away, but makes other people go, oh, like if they're taking a stand here, they've obviously got real opinions on the best way to do this. And so anyway, so it's been fun. We're not quite over the mountain yet, but I can see it on the horizon, and I'm excited about it.
Positioning is, I think, probably one of the most misunderstood marketing functions. Because when I talk with, and so I'm a fractional CMO at times for our clients at Provisions Group, and I've got other fractional CMOs on my team that go and do this. And a lot of times people start 2 or 3 steps down the road, and they start with hey, give me a marketing plan. And I'm like, sure, yes, let's put together a marketing plan, but what's your positioning? And they're like, what do you mean? We sell X. And I'm like, okay, well, that's part of it, but like, who do you sell it to, and why is it better than anybody else's? And they're like, oh, that's because we like this and we did, and it's just this sort of scattered thing.
Yeah.
That I'm always like, we can do marketing, but if you don't have your positioning locked in, everything else cascades from that. All of your story brand, your messaging, all of that falls from that positioning. And what you said, I think, is really, really important, and I want to hone in on it, is having a point of view. Like there's other video podcasting companies out there. There's other, we're IT marketing, IT services and marketing services, plenty of those out there. If you don't come with a point of view, then you're just like everybody else, because everybody does those services. You are a commodity.
Yeah.
And so figuring out that positioning of this is what I do and this is what I don't do, it allows people to have that confidence to talk about it. And they're like, oh, because again, and I'm showing my age, it's like people want to figure out how to categorize you in the Rolodex in their brain. And if they don't know where to slot you, sometimes they got to create a new slot for it, right? But if they don't even know what that is, they're like, I don't know where to put that or think about that. And I'm not going to call them when I have a problem because I don't even know if they do that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's a lot to convince them to take that step back, because we get people that, hey, I need you to fix my marketing, or hey, I need you to do this. And it's like, well, let's make sure we're all aligned. Because one of the things that I do, and this is the funniest thing, because it's not really it's not this really cool, intelligent marketing thing. The first step that I do in positioning is I interview all the key decision makers individually. Mm. And I ask them a series of questions about what do they think the company does? What do they think the value is? Where do they think the company is going? Why do they think customers purchase, right? All these lists of questions, and write all of this stuff down. And then I put it together and come back with all of them together and say, y'all agree on these 3 things. Y'all are all over the map on these 5, right? And we've got to agree on all of these things.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, no, where were this? I thought you were this. And the reason I do it all individually is because it's exactly what you said earlier in the podcast. A lot of times the CEO is like, well, we're this, and this. And everybody else is just like, yes, that is we, and it's like, once you get them individually, and then they're kind of sweating it out. And again, you're the consultant, so you're like, I'm just going to say it like it is, right?
Yeah.
He thinks this and she thinks that.
Yes.
And we, and a lot of times it's good because the CEO is like, oh, I didn't realize I didn't realize you wanted to go there or that we were this or that way, because those leaders in your company are taking their perception of your company to their teams. And those teams are taking their leaders' perception of the company and now their perception of the company out to the marketplace.
Yes.
And so if your executive leadership team is not on board, that next layer of leaders, depending on the size of your org. So that's where I always start. We start getting everybody on board, and I write this, sometimes it's like I write it down and say, okay, look, you have your positioning written down. Now we're going to go talk to your customers, and we're going to say, and we're going to ask them the same questions I ask you. And we're going to see if you're right, because you think you have positioned your company a certain way. But let's talk to your customers and let's see where they've categorized you in their Rolodex, because it may be in a different place. And a lot of times we get that, like the customer just comes back and they're like, oh no, I see him as this. And I'm like, this is not what this is.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out, either we got to shift it one way or another. We either go with the customer or we need to start changing that perception of us. So
Yeah.
I love this conversation. And because, again, I think positioning it feels like, oh, I'm just going to write this sentence.
Yeah.
And you're like, it is a sentence, but it's so much bigger than that. And if you don't spend the right amount of time getting that foundation, getting that core locked in, everything is just going to not fall into place down the line. So if you had some advice for marketing leaders or CEOs or a C-suite that is in charge of marketing that is going through this similar thing, what would you, based on these mistakes, based on your experience, what would you advise them to do?
I would say bring on somebody outside the organization to do exactly what you just laid out, frankly. I mean, because when I think about how you spelled it out, our fractional CMO didn't run through that exact same process of like interviewing everybody individually and then pointing it back to me. But that outside perspective of somebody that you respect, you respect the way they think, you respect their perspective, let them come in and call your baby ugly. I don't know that that's groundbreaking advice at all, but I wish that I would have had somebody tell me like earlier, like, hey man, your baby's ugly, and we need to think about how we can possibly put a bow tie on it. Well, this has been a blast, dude. I'm really grateful for you having me on here, and hopefully this is a kick in the pants for somebody watching it.
Yeah, thanks. We'll talk soon.
All right, later, brother.
Thanks again for listening to the My Biggest Marketing Mistake podcast. We hope you got a lot of valuable insights that you can apply to your business today. And we're not done. We've got a lot more great stories of failure coming your way. So be sure to follow us on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, or check us out on YouTube. And be sure to leave us a rating and review, because it helps a lot. Now, here's what's coming up on our next episode.
That day, I can picture where I was. I'm like, that was my first mistake. I should have stood firm. But again, in my mind, these people know more than me. So why wouldn't we trust them and do that? So we invested in a huge amount of inventory on a double amount probably of SKUs than we wanted to start with.